Explained by the Billy Meier contacts, mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more. Compiled by David Chance, revised October 18, 2023.
Ukraine-Russia War 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine Russo-Ukrainian War. See also American hegemony. Contact Report 834.
And America is leading everything evil that is happening in Ukraine in the background, as the main actor in various manners for the delusion of world domination, and also from the very beginning with the involvement of mercenaries from all over the world and warfare advice and help for Zelensky. Therefore, a proxy war for America and its delusion of world domination is also being waged under the direction of Zelensky. With Zelensky, the buck has been turned into the hunter who, together with the Americans, is hunting Europe against peace and freedom. Zelensky, who is a war maniac, plays his role as an actor, that is to say, as a state and war actor so perfectly that all those who listen to his lies are in bondage to him. He
is a wolf in sheep's clothing, as we say.
Contact Report 840.
As far as the war in Ukraine is concerned, it was probably started by Putin, the president of Russia. But America, in its delusion of hegemony, has done everything to ensure that it has come to such a pass that Putin has gone berserk. However, this also shows that he is no better than the American leaders, because the hostility comes from both sides. Basically, the blame for the whole thing is that America wants to make a pig out of Russia, ultimately with the help of NATO, which is what America is hoping for. In the 1990s, a treaty was agreed and signed that there would be no NATO expansion eastwards across the German border, which was promised to Russia on high. Shortly afterwards, however, America and NATO broke this treaty and expanded further eastwards country by country, cutting Russia off from the west. Now Ukraine was to be added to this, which Russia of course resisted, and that is why it finally started the war. Thus began the idiotic war, which has now lasted for over a year, with further idiots from various foreign states supplying weapons of all kinds to Ukraine, whereby the whole thing goes on, and Zelensky, the name of the war-addicted leader of Ukraine, is able to continue this war. Both sides, Ukraine and Russia, are committing many monstrous war crimes, but the Ukrainians are worse, because they simply murder their own military if they are pro-Russian, just as they not only rape the country's own women, but then shoot them in order to blame these outrages on the Russians, as I myself have seen, together with Bermuda.
Contact Report 841.
This is especially true of Zelensky, but also of Ukraine, a country that has otherwise already made a name for itself as a result of its, to say the least, strangely Nazi-connected behavior over many years. Just as America, addicted to world domination, is also being worked into the hands by granting all possible help to the warmonger Zelensky, America itself is working behind the scenes in the Ukraine war, as I have seen for myself with you. The USA and Germany are diligently helping this big-talking clown in every conceivable way, while the German Foreign Minister Baerbock is also doing everything she can to work into the hands of America and NATO, namely by bullying the leaders of various states and creating hostile sentiment against Russia, thereby evoking an evil mood of war.
Contact Report 842.
But what is happening at present with the Ukrainian war, that is a version that you certainly do not know, as it is also happening on Earth for the first time. This is that many countries are interfering unilaterally and supplying weapons to Ukraine in order to strengthen the warmonger Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, in his war mania. This while America is working in the background, because of which the war has also broken out and Russia has started it. All the madmen who thoughtlessly supply weapons to this mad Zelensky are thereby furthering the purpose of the whole thing, namely that America with its NATO comes one step closer to its delusion of world domination, namely by defeating Russia and making a pig of it and incorporating Ukraine into NATO.
We know this, and all the ignorant and irresponsible of those states that supply weapons, whereby many human lives are murdered and destruction is unparalleled, and the war continues longer and longer, are unable to realize, due to their very pitiful inability to think, that this America is the real authorship of the whole thing.
Now it is simply to be said once again that the unrighteous of the people in America are to blame for the fact that the Russians started the war in Ukraine, which has now lasted for over a year and has cost many human lives. It is worth mentioning that the righteous of the Americans can distance themselves from this, because they are not listened to anyway when the bulk of the unrighteous masses howl away.
Contact Report 844.
And with regard to the present, the clown and actor Volodymyr Oleksandrovich Zelensky should be mentioned, who, as the son of a cyberneticist and an engineer, is a war criminal and a straw man of America, and has drawn many government officials of various countries to his and America's side in Ukraine, who are stupidly and carelessly supplying him with weapons, and are guilty of the fact that the Ukrainian war has now been going on for so long, instead of the fact that it would have been over and finished after only 16 days without the arms supplies of the irresponsible powerful of other states. However, the fact that since the end of the war, America has still been squatting in Germany as the main occupation, conducting it politically and using it underhandedly today, in order to use the clown and warmonger Zelensky in Ukraine as a straw man for the war against Russia, so as not to have to step directly into the limelight and admit that behind everything there is only the America hegemony known from time immemorial, is not recognized by the stupid rulers of Germany, nor by the EU dictatorship powers. The mere fact that the neo-Nazis in Germany are supplying weapons to Zelensky, not to Ukraine, but really to the warmongering Zelensky, only brings treacherous America closer to its delusion of hegemony. This with the additional help of all those states that supply weapons to Zelensky, and thus effectively and truly wage war against Russia. The claim that this is not the case is nothing more than an infamous lie and deception, because the West is effectively waging war against Russia, insidiously steered by America, which in its hegemony mania has known no limits since time immemorial, and is supported by the majority of Americans.
What you have heard says enough, both with regard to Zelensky and also with regard to America, which you have now mentioned. Moreover, everything is indisputable, just as it is indisputable that the West, and America in the front line, is waging war against Russia, for what the Western states allow themselves to do, namely to supply weapons, etc., to Zelensky, are effectively acts of war and an open war against Russia, which, however, is a new kind of warfare as it appears on Earth for the first time. Moreover, it is worth mentioning that the weapons are effectively being delivered to Zelensky, as you say, not to the state of Ukraine, most of whose population wants nothing to do with the war, as we explored.
I also know that, because that's what various people in Ukraine told me when I was there with Bermunda and also with Florena. There were even people who said that this Zelensky should be taken by the devil, because he only brings suffering and fear, as well as death, ruin and destruction over the whole country, as well as that America is behind everything, and that this should also be taken by the devil. Zelensky, he said, was only a straw man of America, and moreover, greedy for power and even more stupid than stupid. But the idiots of many states of arms suppliers to Zelensky are so stupid that they do not realize the truth, especially that America is behind it all, and wields the scepter of it all in order to indulge in hegemony. Like many others, however, most of the powerful in the state governments have no idea of how the countries must be run because they have no leadership qualities whatsoever. Moreover, they are often just puppets of other states, just as the ineffectual Zelensky in Ukraine is just a straw man of the Americans.
Contact Report 845.
Zelensky is a warmonger and war fanatic, while Putin is irreconcilably waging war as a result of injustice committed by America, together with NATO regarding the breach of the treaty concerning the non-NATO enlargement to the east. I am talking about irreconcilability and deliberately not about revenge, because Putin negotiated for a long time with America that the treaty of the non-NATO enlargement to the east, which was stipulated in the early 1990s, forbade, and what should not be broken, that now Ukraine should be included in the NATO murder organization, as it happened contrary to the treaty with the other states connected to Germany to the east, which were never allowed to become NATO members according to the treaty. America and its NATO, which was created by America, according to the idea of Harry Truman, and had a strict hegemonic background, thus spread out across the borders of Germany into the eastern countries in contravention of the treaty. Now they also want to cash in on Ukraine, which Putin resisted for a long time, but finally lost patience when the NATO accession plan was not shelved. Consequently, he ordered the Ukraine war. Of course, this was not good and is criminal, because war is never good. It is an inexcusable crime. But it was obviously America's intention that Putin should lose patience and start the war, because this was definitely expected. Because, as a Ukrainian told me about 3 months ago, Russia was to be made a complete pig of and ultimately have to submit to America, because America wanted world domination and absolute control over the earth.
America is not only the author of it all and provoked the war, and as we have explored, but for the sake of her effort of hegemony, she is also bent on forcing Russia down and integrating her into her world domination alliance. In order to achieve this, the Nazi-minded ones from the leadership in Germany are giving all help to America and Ukraine without hesitation, as well as the European Union and all the states which are supplying weapons to Ukraine, and which are thus favoring everything in such a way that the war is lasting longer and longer. In fact, everything in this regard has been arranged so deceitfully by America's actions that the American supporting part of several states unhesitatingly joined in the conduct of supplying arms to Ukraine, and thereby waging war against Russia in a wise that we are not familiar with such an action in our far-reaching history. Furthermore, our investigations have revealed that American forces are directly involved in the war without the world public being informed. In our opinion, what is taking place in this respect in the war in Ukraine is an insidious and hegemonic act of will on the part of America. This, however, is something that the stupidity of the incompetent Nazi-minded leaders of Germany cannot understand, as well as all the leaders of other states who follow this mindset and all those who are like-minded.
I know that through the propaganda that is made against Russia, and Ukraine is lifted to the skies, everything is on the one hand reported in a lying manner, and, on the other hand, what is really going on in the war in Ukraine is misrepresented or concealed. It is also deliberately concealed that Russia is also being insidiously attacked from Ukraine, etc., as well as the fact that the countries supplying weapons to Zelensky are not helping Ukraine against the Russians, but America, which in its delusion of world domination is letting the Ukrainians wage war against Russia in order to be able to annex it. Yes, I know, and this brings me back to the war in Ukraine, which is truly underhandedly directed by America with the straw man Zelensky, taking advantage of the low intelligence of the government, leaders and the part of the peoples of the Western countries and other lunatic global supporters who are supplying weapons to Zelensky and aiding and abetting sanctioned murder and destruction. This, instead of efforts being made to stop the senseless murder and destruction. On the contrary, these government powers and the war supporters bask in it, believing in their low intelligence and dim-wittedness, Zelensky and America believe, as well as in their partisanship to provide help to end the war. And that there is no mention of the blaming of Russia and Putin is because, for its part, Russia's, which also murders, destroys, and acts criminally. It cannot be included in all the insidious, underhanded, as well as the hegemonic machinations and intrigues of America. This, like Zelensky's consistently mendacious begging of help for weapons, which are supplied practically with a kiss of the hand by irresponsible Nazi-like state powers of Germany and other Western countries, which thereby completely unconscionably help to continue the murder and destruction, and thus the war in Ukraine for a long time to come. In this process, through the help with huge amounts of money and the many arms deliveries to Zelensky, the helpful idiots and government bigwigs of various states and their supporters from the various peoples are undoubtedly waging partisan war against Russia. All of these pathological idiots blame Putin alone, who of course is also acting criminally, but cannot be called the author of the whole thing, even though he ordered the war, because the real culprit is and remains America with its hegemonic mania and its NATO. This, however, is not considered by all helpers, that America is behind everything and insidiously manages everything, together with the warmongering strawman Zelensky.
This is truth, as our observers and elucidators have fathomed, but this is what the America-friendly and Zelensky-friendly do not want to admit, as we also found out. And when Ptas speaks of a Nazi mindset of state leaders in Germany, this is to be extended to a part of the people, as regarding a part of the Ukrainian state leadership and population, as well as the state leaders and parts of the population with the whole of the complicity of the American machinations.
Ptas explicitly mentioned that the wrong and idiotic actions regarding the arms deliveries to Zelensky are being copied by a large part of the Nazi behavior of the rulers to parts of the people, the children as well as the adolescents, right-wing extremists and neo-Nazis. In the same respect, he said, is the conduct and attitude of certain people in the dictatorship organization EU, especially with regard to those bigwigs who boast of German descent or are under the direct or indirect influence of the ruling neo-Nazis. All of them, by the way, are responsible and partly to blame for the fact that absolutely only one-sided success reports of war actions and war profits are made in favor of the Ukrainian military and the big-talking Zelensky, while war crimes are committed by the Ukrainian military and are not disclosed. This is consistently in contrast to the fact that regarding that the outrages of the Russian military are very much mentioned. So the war coverage is only one-sided, in the process of praising the Ukrainian military and its gains and Zelensky to the skies, and either disregarding or blowing up Russia's military and Putin. Moreover, it is the case, as I know from my own observation, that the Ukrainian forces, in addition to also operating on Russian territory and carrying out acts of sabotage, and with the help of the Yanks in the background, want to attack Moscow and other places with drones, as Zelensky has ordered, also to assassinate Putin, which I heard myself, together with Bermunda, when we were able to eavesdrop on him with the help of the language translator.
Contact Report 852.
The world domination-addicted Americans who, through the agitation of their shadow government and the incompetent Nazi-like leaders, bring war and disaster upon the earth and earthly humanity. They are all truly those who caused the war in Ukraine and are underhandedly waging it under their direction, which the majority of the American people do not want and are in no manner involved in, and are not of the same mind as the criminal Nazi-like leaders.
Contact Report 856.
As usual, only the Russians are the incarnation of evil, while Zelensky in Ukraine, and the arms suppliers and all their supporters, as well as all the war supporters, are the good guys. But the truth is that of all people, the arms suppliers to Ukraine, some 50 states, and their supporters, as well as all those who support the war in the first place, are the incarnation of evil. In truth, they are the ones who are contributing to a strange world war burning in Ukraine, allowing a warmonger named Zelensky to indulge his warmongering addiction, and a war disposer named Putin to also surrender to his war ambitions. All the arms suppliers and their supporters and partisans are to blame for the fact that the war can continue for so long, and human beings are being murdered, as well as immense destruction being caused. This, while in the background, America and its government and shadow government pull their strings and control everything to finally make their hegemonistic plans come true. It would be correct if all the stupid opponents, if they want strife, war, murder and destruction because they are insane, hateful and vindictive, because they are not capable of thinking in a completely normal and correct way, but are religious believers and worldly thinkers and only indulge in the lust for power, then they should smash their own skulls. That is how the mad presidents Putin, Zelensky, Biden, and all the gangs of their supporters and the American shadow government should fight with each other, wielding swords and hitting each other with machine guns, tanks, missiles, and bombs. This instead of the military waging war, committing murder by the meter, torture and rape, creating immense hardship and roaring misery, as well as endless destruction. If all the idiots who cause wars and also all the like-minded people, and in general all the brainless people who take part and approve of everything had to stick their own skulls in and let themselves be beaten up, and really only these among themselves, then there would at least be no wars in this respect, and also no distress, no misery, as well as no rapes, no torture, and no destruction, etc. But this does not seem to work with the peoples, because they prefer to get involved and murder themselves. The majority of them are so stupid and unthinking that they do not elect healthy and righteous, honest and not power-hungry persons to the government, but unfit, selfish, power-hungry, and other idiots whom they elevate to government offices as rulers and government forces. This is always done finely according to the principle, the cow chooses its own butcher. While the truth is that Ukraine was attacked by Russia, the question is, where is the intelligentum, logic, reason, and sanity of the Western rulers and their supporters from the people? They are all so stupid that they do not understand that they are accomplices in a strange world war that America is secretly and deceitfully waging in Ukraine for the sake of its hegemony, with NATO still involved, for which America is truly secretly wielding the scepter. But the stupid of the world unfortunately do not die out, so neither do the similarly stupefied listeners who listen to the stupid of those non-thinking rulers, who wrap the stupid of the population around their fingers with fanciful lies, and who believe the lies and then fall prey to those who indulge in power, and who are America's followers. Well, there is something else to say, namely that Ukraine has become and remained a victim of geopolitical interests since Hitler's war from 1939 to 1945, and the latter because America wants NATO to contract the country and thus move closer to Russia. And this is exactly why America provoked Russia to such an extent that Putin launched a war of aggression on 2022, which, however, was not correct and ill-considered and is such that it will never bring, as every war only brings disaster, hardship, misery, death, and destruction, what would correspond to correctness. The biggest fools in this are the partisan, America-friendly and idiot-thinking heads of countries and their supporters from the respective peoples of various states, who supply money and weapons, etc. to Zelensky, as is also done by certain sides to Putin, even when this is denied, resulting in the effective fact that the war carnage, the murder and destruction, the misery and misery continue. This will continue until the partisanship of the idiotic rulers and the equally idiotic sections of the population who are crying along with them, the supplying of weapons, the donating of money and any other help, as well as the two wartime leaders, Putin and Zelensky, finally put an end to the whole war madness which America, in its delusion of hegemony, is leading and determining in the background. Something that is as clear and conscious to all human beings who are capable of logic and reason in their real and free of any religious thinking, as also free of any opinion, but knowing, as it is incontrovertibly, the reality and truth.
Contact Report 861.
The banner for Ukraine has been and continues to be waved in a partisan manner, ignoring the fact that America is actually to blame for the entire war disaster, which wants to bring NATO into Ukraine for the sake of terror, and thereby completely isolate Russia from the West. But to really think and to understand this, as well as the fact that Russia is fighting back against it, everything and anything becomes unpredictable, as the examples of every war since time immemorial prove. As soon as the first stroke of the sword was made or the first arrow flicked from the string, every war followed its own law and very quickly slipped out of any control of the belligerents. And time and again it has been proved that all the advanced planning of all the belligerents has proved to be null and void. For always, and in every war, everything went completely differently from what was planned in advance. For everything plays out completely differently from what is planned in advance. And this will also prove to be the case in the war between Ukraine and Russia, whereby the underhanded and insidious intrigues of America must also be taken into account, which is actually to blame for everything, because in its delusion of hegemony, it wants to cash in on Ukraine in order to then be on Russia's border with NATO. This, however, is not understood by those idiots who continue to supply weapons to Zelensky, as well as goods of all kinds, whereby the war goes on and on completely irresponsibly. Many human beings die, destruction is wrought, and America laughs up its sleeve at all those foolish and moronic people who diligently help to fulfill its plans for hegemony. Of course, Russia started the war in Ukraine, on Putin's orders, but it would have been the absolute duty of the Swiss government to remain neutral in every respect, not to be partisan, not to work against Russia and to favor Ukraine. And it should finally be recognized and understood by the Swiss government and by the pro-American part of the population that America is behind everything, because it provoked the war until Putin's patience ran out and he started the war, which is of course in no manner excusable, because a war is always and in every case a crime, which can never and in whatever form be talked about as pardonable. So all of Putin's actions were something that was of course wrong and should have been avoided. But when logic, understanding, and reason are not great enough, then unfortunately things crash, and that is and remains inexcusable. So no excuse can be accepted for Putin's actions. However, this is also not the case for the warmonger Zelensky, who is stupidly and foolishly American-minded, together with all those responsible from the 50 or so states that are supplying money and weapons, etc. to Ukraine, thereby creating many thousands of deaths and dragging out the war endlessly. The whole of this war is truly a catastrophe for thousands of human beings, with incalculable consequences for them in the long run. When I get to know all around what attitudes contemporaries carry around with them, I have to say that unfortunately there are only a minority of human beings who generally see the evil warfare on Earth as imbecilic, triggered, and waged only by power-hungry and unscrupulous elements. And what concerns at present especially the fighting, which was instigated between Russia and the Ukraine, by America and is secretly led by it, is the view that the majority of all rulers of almost all countries on Earth is so lowly intelligent and simple-minded that they are not able to perceive that America is scheming behind everything in order to gain world domination. And what is very disturbing is that the mainstream media is silent about the reality and its truth, and instead spreads lying and deceitful untruths, so that the rinds and the timberwork of the houses crack. And what the real facts are, why the Ukrainian war was actually launched, that is swept under the rug, that the righteous citizens of every country should not find out, while those with low intelligence and simple-minded of the majority of the peoples are misled into cheering and hailing America, and praise and exalt all the mad arms suppliers, who have obviously made a fool of Zelensky. The real history of the whole thing and of the war, however, is of no interest to the bulk of the pro-America people, nor to those partisan real idiots in the governments who supply arms and goods to the fanatical warmonger Zelensky. When the collapse of the Soviet Union took place, which was at the beginning of the 1990s, there was an attempt to create a correct, true, and consistent and just balance of interests, so to speak, between the Western states and Russia. Involved in bringing West and East to a stable form of peace agreement at that time was the U.S. President George Bush Sr., as well as the U.S. Secretary of State James Baker, who was the actual leader of the negotiations. In particular, everything was related to Europe, as there was also a great deal of insistence that NATO should not move closer to Russia, and thus that no NATO countries should border Russia. Ministers and diplomats representing France and England played a role in this process, and were concerned that NATO should in no process ever extend to Russia's border. This was an important moment in the balancing of interests between the Western states and Russia, which everyone agreed on. Unfortunately, this was then thrown out because George Bush Sr. was not re-elected as U.S. President, and Bill Clinton, who was hostile to Russia, took his place at the helm. Consequently, all hope for peaceful coexistence between the West and Russia had to be abandoned, because Clinton and the Democratic Party, to which he belonged, wanted to impose that Russia be held down by America and never again become a state in the sense of a great power. This alone, according to the shadow government of America that Clinton and his wife Hillary indoctrinated, who even then was keen on the presidency herself, without them noticing anything. Bill and Hillary Clinton were also strongly opposed to Russia finding military integration into NATO. Consequently, everything failed, and all previous efforts went awry that should have led to peace. So, the Democratic Party of America and Bill and Hillary Clinton are the real original culprits that Putin started the war in Ukraine, because their early rejection was the real and true origin of the war that is now raging between Russia and Ukraine. So, the Democratic Party of America, but also mainly the Clintons, and now of course Biden, the senile and ineffectual would-be president of America, bear the real blame for the war in Ukraine. The Clintons because they were completely misguided at the time about the fact that Russia was only just beginning to take an interest in the democracy of Western countries, which could have led to a real true peace, had not evil prejudice, hatred, and rashness destroyed the whole enterprise of lunatics and power seekers, which other human beings had previously striven to achieve. The Democratic Party of America and the Clintons and their supporters were and are to blame for torpedoing and frustrating the efforts of those who wanted to ensure that no NATO expansion should take place against the borders of Russia. America's new leadership thus deviated from what others actually wanted in terms of an emerging peace between East and West. Hence, America's Democrats and the Clintons are really to blame for Putin unleashing war in Ukraine. The Democratic Party of America, the two Clintons, and now the senile President Biden, and the all-indoctrinating shadow government of the USA are directing all forces and the cold shoulder against a real and true peace with Russia in order to keep the upper hand worldwide. And the fact that the clever rulers of the countries and the America-friendly majority of their peoples have not thought about what is to come will in time, if everything continues like this, have consequences that no one imagines. If we think of Europe alone, then unfortunately it cannot be ruled out that in this respect serious things are to be feared, which can happen as a consequence of lowly intelligent and simple-minded behavior with regard to attitudes, arms deliveries and tying oneself to America, etc. But this can also happen to all those countries that have not thought about America. However, this can also affect all those countries in particular that participate in the arms deliveries, etc., and do not recognize America's hegemonic intrigues, let alone that they have any perspective at all that would let them recognize reality and its truth. Also with regard to their own behavior and lives. What will happen after the war in Ukraine is completely different from what is hoped for, but what will happen in this regard will prove that everything will turn out completely differently from what illusory notions of consequences can dream of. However, silence is to be maintained about this, because the unrealistic, dangerous political machinations will lead to things and reactions that are not foreseen by all those authoritative, idiotic, sick, and power-greedy government powers of various countries. This is also not the case with those idiots of the various 50 or so countries who are now still supplying weapons, tanks and aircraft, etc. to Zelensky, and are thus complicit in the deaths of countless human beings. Truly, they are all just as much murderers as the military who shoot or blow up other military. Thus, degenerate murderers kill other degenerate murderers, with many civilians and children also being killed. Soldiers are unconscionable murderers, and that is also when they are forced into a war and into killing by governments and other rulers. The truth is that when they kill, they murder because they have not normalized their disposition within themselves, and have not made themselves true human beings. Thus, deep in their character lurks cowardly fear, enmity, and hatred. Consequently, they kill and murder equally unthinkingly, as do the military, etc., who oppose them and who are called enemy opponents. Mercenaries and legionaries, etc., are of a different nature and are all the more passionate and deliberate murderers, because they kill voluntarily, for the sake of adventure or passion, as well as for the sake of pay, that is to say, money. Moreover, they are vengeful and vindictive, so they take revenge among themselves, openly or underhandedly, and murder when they feel like it, even if they were in the same direction in a matter, etc. Such people are truly vindictive and vindictive. Such human beings, who truly do not deserve this designation and are only murderers, are nevertheless seen and praised by madmen of the people as big shots, warriors, avant-garde, central figures and devil-may-care men, etc., just as they are still hailed as heroes, venerated, possibly worshipped, even as those killed or murdered openly or underhandedly out of revenge, as those killed in war, and a monument is erected to them.
Contact Report 863.
For you spoke of corruption, which is practically commonplace in all countries throughout the world. Bermunda and I, for example, also found this in Ukraine, where we were able to see how Zelensky works in a mean manner in this respect, who corruptly rakes money into his sack, and therefore only takes half-hearted and fraudulent foamy and pro forma action against corruption. He himself is deeply involved in corruption and fills his own pockets with vast amounts of money that the lowly intelligent and other so-called helpers of the Western countries throw at him, with Germany being at the forefront in this respect. This proves that stupidity knows no bounds, not even among the neo-Nazis who sit in the German government, as is also the case with some other rulers in other countries who may not be genuine Nazis, but who imitate and align their wrong thinking in the same manner as Nazis, and so also act accordingly. Somehow, it seems to me, these human beings are so lowly intelligent, even hypocritical, that they are simply imitators of those genuine Nazis who, in their Nazi thinking, unquestioningly support Zelensky and America with arms supplies, money and ammunition, etc., and thereby promote the endless Ukraine-Russia war and the endless murdering, destroying, torturing, and raping. Also, all the evil atrocities that Ukraine's military is indulging in are hushed up, while everything concerning the Russians is shouted out vituperatively around the world. For example, Bermunda and I saw that in one village, their own Ukrainian human beings were summarily shot as they were picking things out of the rubble. We also saw that Ukrainian soldiers captured and disarmed Russian soldiers, but then shot them a short time later as well. Through Bermunda's efforts, we became aware of many of Zelensky's ploys, including the fact that, as America's lackey, he has secretly become an oligarch. Although, on the other hand, he hypocritically fights other oligarchs when they have something to do with Russia, or are simply suspected of doing so, and collects their assets, in order to allegedly finance the reconstruction of the war damages, whereas he, well, every word is too much. Even that we found out that Zelensky, with regard to state funds. Oh, I am talking too much, because it is no use anyway, because the believers in America and Zelensky will not let themselves be taught, because for them, Russia simply remains the enemy image. The fact that Putin started the war in Ukraine through America's fault was criminal and also despicable. But the fact that this demonizes the Russian people through false opinions and anti-Russian propaganda is simply not correct, because the majority of Russian human beings certainly do not want war. However, America, which hegemonically hopes to bring Ukraine and Russia under its world domination control at the same time, will cut its fingers and sooner or later. However, the fact that America is behind the war in Ukraine in the first place, but covertly and secretly, and that it is arranging everything, is deliberately kept strictly quiet. Namely, it did not fit into America's craving for hegemony that it could not bring its NATO to Ukraine because Russia was against it and vehemently defended itself. Already in the past, contrary to the promise that NATO would not expand against Russia's borders, this promise was broken and finally everything was thrown overboard. Consequently, country after country was taken over and NATO spread and settled in, of course secretly arranged by America. So, America's NATO desire eventually led to war in Ukraine, which, caught up in hegemony mania, wanted to put its NATO on Russia's doorstep, but Russia resisted until Russia's leadership ran out of patience and Putin, with their consent, unleashed the war in Ukraine. Of course, this was and is a crime, as every war was and is today, as it will also be tomorrow and into the distant future. But if Russia had not started this war in Ukraine, America would have done so in a much worse way. Just think of the crimes of the American military and of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the last World War from 1939 to 1945. Truly, the Nazis did catastrophically bad, inhuman and criminal things. But what America has done in bringing the atomic age into being and developing and using the atomic bomb is far more evil and worse, which will be carried further into the future. It is now to be said that if many countries had not been incited by America against Russia, especially Germany and the EU dictatorship, to supply weapons etc. to the warmonger Zelensky, then nuclear munitions etc. would have been used immediately by America, which would have caused a worse catastrophe and had worldwide consequences than these which already are. And that is absolutely certain, and actually the world can thank you that it was not America that started the criminal war, but Russia. If America had launched the war, together with its NATO, which is actually directed by America in the background, then many things would simply have been matai at the end, and several millions and even billions of human beings would no longer be alive. And, this is also to be said, if it had not been for America, and if it had not incited other governments and peoples against Russia, and if mercenaries had not been called upon to intervene in Ukraine, which quickly happened, with even Swiss people going to Ukraine as mercenaries, because Zelensky quickly built on a mercenary force, then the war would have been dead and over in 16 days. But hegemonistic America was not interested in this, because the hegemony mania simply did not allow it. This, however, is not the fault of the righteous Americans, but only affects those human beings in America who go along with the hegemony and agree with what the government and shadow government are doing in this respect. But as America continued to live under hegemony mania, it sought to finally cut Russia off from the West with a nasty NATO intervention in Ukraine, which Russia's Security Council did not put up with and gave Putin free rein. But the idiotic rulers, mainly of America-friendly Western countries, who let themselves be blinded by America, fell for its trickery, lies, and deceit. And in doing so, they are causing such immeasurable damage, without thinking about reality and its truth, that is pre-programming the coming disaster, which can only be prevented if the effective truth is still recognized and acted upon. All the governments and populations of those countries that have been and continue to be taken in by America's machinations, that is to say its government and shadow government, are doing everything they can to give their underhanded efforts and wishes all the help they can, consequently aiding and abetting strife and secret service murders and wars. And this will continue until it is finally realized that America and its murderous organization NATO exist, in a delusion of hegemony that will stop at nothing and cash in on the whole world if it is not powerfully countered and the world domination airs are not finally ended.
Contact Report 865.
You, Plearan, have nothing to do with the foreigners and their UFOs. Consequently, nothing is to be expected from you regarding interference in earthly affairs or any concerns. nor that you would in any wise endanger security or bring danger. This is the opposite of the Earthlings themselves, because the war in the Ukraine, which Russia started because the Americans pushed everything so far that it went bang, because they want to make a pig out of Russia and take it, proves enough. And how lowly, intelligent, and simple-minded many rulers and parts of the populations of about 50 countries are, who supply weapons and money, etc., to the fanatical warmonger Zelensky, proves on the other hand that the Earthlings themselves are the great danger, and that it does not come from you. All this proves that the Earthlings, in their greed for power, stupidity, dim-wittedness, as well as in their discord and above all, in their inability to develop themselves into true human beings, are waging wars and enmities, and are still biased in this respect. There has been enough proof of this for thousands of years, for war has been going on Earth in this wise since time immemorial. And that it is the same with the war in Ukraine, that is undoubtedly, and that it is not recognized by the stupid ones as well as the governments involved in it, and also the howling parts of the population that Zelensky, who is begging for weapons, etc., all over the world, is just as much a Nazi as Hitler was, only that Zelensky acts in a perfidious, underhanded, greasy, and otherwise, that the stupid ones of his supporters do not see and recognize, however. As elsewhere, they also do not see that Zelensky has his own plans for world domination, which he strives for much more perfidiously than hegemonic America does. This is despite the fact that he is a puppet of America and will be dropped or murdered when he is no longer needed and has done his duty. But before that, he will be abused as a Jew by America without noticing it in his lowly intelligent and simple-mindedness, and ultimately spreading Jew hatred worldwide once again. But he can still win over many lowly, intelligent, and simple-minded people around the world who are believers in his art of persuasion. It will...
Excuse me, but it is to be said that it is not recognized that, as Bermunda and I have noted, Zelensky is running a Nazi-style Nazi regency in Kiev, with those indoctrinated by Zelensky being of the same mind as him and thus having Nazi-like views. Furthermore, we have also clearly established that like-minded Nazi elements of the Ukrainian leaders have connections with various leaders and parts of the population of the arms-supplying states, and I would like to mention in particular those in Germany. This is a fact which is not recognized due to the lack of recognition of the partisan responsible state leaders and that part of the population which is unthinking and falsely well-meaning towards America and Zelensky. All of them, due to their all-embracing and thinking limitations, can also not see and recognize what Zelensky actually wants, namely, that he is striving for the domination of Earth, which he wants to achieve with the help of America working in the background, whose state leaders and parts of the population are also so ignorant that they do not recognize this.
Oops. All this raises something new to think about. But the rulers of Germany and 50 other countries are probably incapable of doing so, as they were from the very beginning when the war was started, which would have ended after only about 14 days if it had not been for the idiots who supplied weapons, etc. from the start, and continue to do so. The war, however, has been raging for a long time now, and on both of the warring sides it is constantly claiming many dead, which the arms suppliers and Zelensky supporters and Russia haters do not care about at all, because they are far away from the gun that they, for the time being, are not hit by a bullet. However, all those who are really the idiots of the world cannot understand that the war is continuing, for which actually only America with its NATO murder organization is to blame, as well as those who supply the weapons, etc. to Ukraine, that is to say to Zelensky, as well as the other Zelensky supporters. They also do not know that foreign military forces have been secretly fighting in Ukraine against the Russians for a long time, but this will become official in the near future.
Contact Report 866.
But I want to say something that I told you recently, because I mentioned that Zelensky, as a Jew, is inciting the whole world and the enemies of the Jews against the believers in the Jews, and therefore against all of Judaism, just as the Nazis did and persecuted and murdered the Jews, just as happened in the last World War. But as it has been for hundreds of years, namely that Judaism and with it the Jewish believers are persecuted, harassed, and even murdered, it will continue with the help of today's neo-Nazi thinkers who think just like the Nazis back then. But they are so stupid and lowly intelligent that they do not realize that they neither realize nor understand that they are Nazi-like thinkers and doers, and that with their stupid attitude, their lack of understanding, their support and the supply of weapons, etc., to the warmonger Zelensky, they are promoting unparalleled hatred of the Jews. This is because Zelensky, being of Jewish origin, is successful with his arms begging, etc., and his successes in this respect with about 50 countries and their idiotic governments and parts of their populations. This, of course, is very badly and hatefully received by the Jew-hating elements around the world, who will roar furiously and more than ever against Jewry. The great complicity in all that is happening in Ukraine and in the hatred and evil still to come concerning Jew hatred is thus shared by all those idiots of rulers, and all supporters from the populations concerned who biasedly supply and endorse weapons to the war fanatic and warmonger Zelensky, whereby the war and the massacres, rapes, prisoner shootings, and other war crimes, etc., can continue unchecked. The ultimate consequence of this, and this is absolutely certain, will be that politico-religious criminal organizations, such as Al-Qaeda and others, will interfere, which is already happening secretly, but which will become public. What is to be revealed, however, is that in the forefront is undoubtedly the government of Germany with America in the background, and that part of the idiotic supporters from the people who can think as little as those parts of those in power who are neo-Nazis in their mindset, without actually being aware of it, as is also the case in other countries. And the fact that the cross-headed foreign minister of Germany is pouring petrol on the fire around the world by distorting the effective truth and making propaganda for Zelensky is just the last straw. In the war in Ukraine, of course, there can be no talk of one side alone, because firstly America is to blame for the whole thing, because if it had not been for its idiotic and criminal desire, Russia would never have attacked Ukraine. So Russia is also involved in the crime of the Ukrainian war, like the idiotic and murderous mercenaries who are doing their mischief in Ukraine, whereby America is also involved in this. This is an effective fact, which is, however, concealed from the outside world, also from the ruling and cheering populations of the 50 or so countries, who are biased, lowly intelligent, and ignorant about what is actually going on in Ukraine. That with everything that these 50 or so countries, with Germany and America in the lead, are doing together, without even suspecting in their low intelligence that America is only surreptitiously pushing its hegemony plans further towards realization with the Ukraine war, this clearly reveals the stupidity of the arms suppliers and their supporters. And since a strange world war is actually being waged in a sneaky way, precisely because around 50 countries are supplying weapons to Zelensky through America's insidiousness, this war may yet become open, because the continuation in the Middle East is already beginning for this, in which America will interfere, as well as religious political murderer organizations, such as Al-Qaeda, as I have already said. However, all those idiots who supply weapons to Zelensky or support this are obviously not aware of this, but also unconsciously and lowly intelligent support America's striving for hegemony, and even actively help to achieve this goal.